Absolutely.
Action. um, so, hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Local Tourist Experience, the business edition. So this week we have a special guest from the Cotswolds, although he originally hails from New York. And it'll be great to get his background and a bit more insight into the business and how he founded it and how it's grown so much, and not just that, how it's adapted to the recent times. So may I please present Dan Szor. Dan, please take it away.
Carla, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, virtually
Thank
anyhow.
you.
Hopefully
Yes,
one day we'll get you down to the distillery.
absolutely. So can you please tell us a bit more about, well, maybe the early days in New York, and then how you were brought over to the Cotswolds as a local?
Sure. Well, I grew up about as far away, both geographically in terms of, what you have around you growing up, as you could get to the sort of farmhouse that I live in the North Cotswolds in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a field. I grew up on the Upper East Side of New York City, really urban upbringing, but I guess, that weighs on you so much when you live in New York full time that you get to have a real appreciation of nature. The typical New Yorkers just have to get out of town every couple of weeks, every couple of months, whether they go to the beach or the mountains or whatever. My parents also always, my parents came from Poland, and they had this European sensibility and this real appreciation of nature. So, I always grew up just loving the time when you got out of the city, and it was always a little bit of a bummer to go back in. And so, but I still kind of led a very urban life, and after university, I went off to work on Wall Street, as a lot of people did back in the '80s, and I started working for a couple of banks and an investment management firm, and then that took me to Paris for 10 years, and then it took me to London. So it was always very urban. But while I was living in France, I had two sons while I was there, and we rented a little weekend home in Normandy, in the middle of just sort of real
Nice.
cider and Calvados country, and the apple orchards. And it made such an impression on my kids that when I found myself years later in London, with remarried and with a young daughter, I thought I wanted to give her that same experience. And my wife had been not very well; she'd been ill, and I thought we really needed a place to just go to at the weekend. And that's how I ended up in a farmhouse in North Cotswolds. What was originally meant to be just weekends, but then I fell in love with it. And you get to a point in your life when you say, what are the priorities? And for me, it was really
Mm,
being in nature more. So this distillery was really about combining two things that I loved, which was the Cotswolds and whiskey.
nice.
And I thought if I
How
could actually find a way of putting the two together and not having to go back every Sunday night to London, to the city job I didn't really enjoy very much, that would be a good thing.
So that's the trick, isn't it? Is work doing what you love if you can.
If you
So
can get it.
how did that come to be? I'm assuming the love of whiskey started a while before, but how did it triggered for you to go, I can do this in the Cotswolds?
Well, the love of whiskey started actually when I was in France, when I was living in Paris. So the first couple of years I was in France, I did what most American expats who are kind of slightly foodie and drinky did. I had a car, so every weekend my ex and I would go running around and go to vineyards and go talk to people and come back with the boot of the car filled with cases of wine and things like that. And living in France is great for that kind of thing. Um, but then I think it was in 2000 that I was invited to a meeting of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Paris. And it's a little known fact that the French are the world's #1 consumers of whiskey. They love their whiskey. Um,
I didn't
they
know that.
export all their cognac and they import all their whiskey. And so I fell in love at this meeting. I just started discovering cask strength whiskey and all the differences between distilleries and expressions and ages and whatever and barrels. So I started really getting into whiskey, and I had a friend in New York who was going through the same kind of thing. And so we would sort of do a yearly guys trip, going off to Scotland to go
Mm,
visit distilleries, kind of like that film Sideways, sort of two
yeah.
sad men kind of just going around and drinking.
It's a bit
Um,
harsh, but yeah.
and but it was, and I just fell completely in love with whiskey from a different point of view, not just the product and the liquid, but the place it's made, the romance, the heritage, the natural beauty of which that Scotland is full of. And it was kind of on one of those trips that we were off on Isla, which is the
Mm.
island off in the western in the Hebrides, with I think 9 distilleries now, maybe more. But we went into one called Bruichladdich, and it had just been restored or brought out of silence. And we got talked into buying a barrel of that whiskey. We didn't walk in. We walked in for a tour, and we walked out being the owners of a barrel. And once you own a barrel of whiskey, that distillery means something more to you. You sort of almost follow it like if it was your home football team or whatever.
Yeah.
And we followed this amazing story of Bruichladdich for 10 years, and they did very well and ultimately got bought by Remy Cointreau. But they what was great about them was they really pushed the whole romance of place, and Isla is an incredible place. If you've ever been, I mean, it's definitely a place that's worth going, even if you're not into whiskey. Really gorgeous. And there was a sense of terroir that they were really pushing too in their whiskey, to the point of actually getting local farmers to grow barley, even though that's not a crop that typically grows these days on Isla, so that they could make Isla barley whiskey. So basically, cut
Mm.
to 2012 when I'm sitting in this farmhouse that my wife and I bought, and I'm looking out on a field of barley, and I looked at this field of barley and I said, you know what? There's a lot of barley growing in the Cotswolds, but no one's ever made any whiskey. And
Ding.
we get 30 million visitors a year, and everybody likes to tour a distillery, or a lot of people do anyhow. I certainly did. And I thought if you could basically express the beauty of this place through a whiskey, just as they do up in Scotland, and if you could get a lot of people to visit, just as they do up in Scotland, then it could work.
Mm.
So.
Interesting. So that's how it all started. So how many years has it been now since you opened it, or since you started?
So we're in our 7th year now.
Okay.
We
Nice.
began distilling in September of 2014, and we started distilling whiskey, and we also started making gin. And the whiskey, of course, by law in Europe, whiskey has to be a minimum of 3 years of age before you can call it whiskey.
Mhm.
So we didn't expect anyone would hear of us very soon. We thought we'd just be kind of quietly working away, laying down stocks, and then eventually, 3 years later, if the whiskey was ready, then we would release some. But in the meantime, we decided also to make gin, and we worked
Mm.
very hard on the recipe. For the whiskey, we had a couple of great Scottish consultants that helped us sort of fast track the process of making our whiskey. But for the gin, it was really all up to us to come up with a recipe, and we did 2 months of work on that, and we came up with a really nice recipe. And that started getting noticed, and we got our first listings within a week of the spirit flowing, in places like Fortnum and Mason and Harvey
Mm.
Nichols, and it all kind of just took off a lot faster than we expected. And by the time the whiskey was ready, we were already pretty well known for our gin, and then we had to sort of tell people that we were actually whiskey distillers as well. So it's
That's
busy.
I mean, and yeah, the UK, I think there almost seems to never be any shortage of gin, and people will always want more. It just never ends, which is good.
True.
So how have you been finding having to sort of balance both the whiskey and the gin side? Which is actually more popular? Is it two different segments? Where do you put the effort into, or is it the same?
Yeah. Well, I always say I treat them like my kids. You don't tell one, you don't love one kid more than another. You just love them each in their different ways. And I
Yeah.
think that, and some people have said that whiskey distilleries, like craft whiskey distilleries, make gin just because they're looking for some easy cash flow while they're waiting on their whiskey to age, because gin doesn't need to be aged. You can make it on a Tuesday and sell it on a Wednesday. But I take real offense at that, because I love my gin as much as I love my whiskey, and we put a crazy amount of time and effort and quality into making our gin. So I always say we kind of make our gin like a whiskey geek would want to make gin if he was making gin.
Hmm.
Really with a focus on big, full flavors, viscosity, something that just jumps out at you from the glass, aromas and finishes, and so we're happy to sort of do both. The difference is that with whiskey, of course, you've got to be thinking about how much you think you're going to need 5 years from now, whereas with gin, you can basically adapt your production to the demand. But right
Mm.
now in the UK, I would say we're selling probably 3 bottles of gin for every bottle of whiskey we sell, because whiskey's still only
Mm.
2, 3 years out in the market. But
Yeah.
the growth is definitely really happening now in the whiskey. People are starting to notice. I think whiskey in general, UK is a gin drinking nation, but internationally, I think whiskey, when it comes to premium spirits, is really in first place. And there's a real awareness of what people are calling new age whiskey or new
Mm-hmm.
world whiskey. Um, and that's whiskeys made in the non-traditional places, so not Scotland, Ireland, US, Canada, but whiskey from Taiwan, whiskey from Japan. I mean, Japan's actually now getting to be pretty well known as a whiskey producing area, but
Yeah.
Tasmania, Sweden, Denmark, I mean, you name it, people are making whiskey all over the world, and that's now taken hold. And so we're part of that group. But additionally, what's really cool is that we were, I think, only the second or third distillery in England to make whiskey, but there's now 25 distilleries in England
Oh,
making
that's
whiskey.
fast.
So that's actually creating interest in the whole category of English whiskey. So we feel sort of like we're in the sweet spot. It's just that with whiskey, growth comes slow and over many years. Even though we try and educate people that it's not really all about the age, and it's certainly not about the water, as the Scots would have you believe. It's about how you make it, and that we make a really good whiskey a whiskey that's really good at 3 years old. But whatever you try and explain to people, we'll never keep up with the millions that get spent by Scottish marketing. And a lot of people
Mm.
feel that unless a whiskey has double-digit uh, age statements on the label, they're not going to pay attention to it. So we know that our growth will be sort of slow and steady over time, and we're actually fine with that because there's only so
Mm.
much we can make anyhow.
And is that age thing the other one that's a bit of a contentious topic where the age can be a little bit manipulated in a way depending on how it's blended, or are there very strict rules with that labeling?
Well, you have to so the rule in Scotland is that the age you put on, if you choose to put an age on the bottle, it has to be the age of the youngest whiskey.
Mm.
But they won't. The rules are sort of strange, and they won't allow you to divulge the age of the different whiskeys in there. And it's all a little bit kind of arcane and a little bit. We believe in full transparency, but the reason we don't put an age on our whiskey is because it's not 3 years isn't going to impress anybody. What is going to impress people is the way it tastes.
Mm.
So, somebody asked me the other day, "What's your elevator pitch about your whiskey?" I said, "Put down the bottle, cover up the bottle, don't look at the label, just just have some. Just
Mm.
nose it, taste it, and if you like it, I mean that's there is no old whiskey and young whiskey versus there's just good and bad or whiskey you like and whiskey you don't like. So
Yeah.
that's our pitch right now.
So I think and speaking to a lot of bar owners and other types of operations that sell alcohol, there's a big piece with that education side of things that you mentioned as well, not just on the professional side of the hospitality side, but with the general public as well. So I know that you do the tours and experiences. And I think something you mentioned earlier as well is that people are more open to that education piece and are more curious. So what is it that you guys are contributing to that and hopefully expanding people's knowledge and so on?
Yeah, we love it. I mean, typically a whiskey geek will like nothing more than talking about making whiskey. I mean, there's just, and he could probably go on until your eyes are, yeah, it, uh, it's something that it's easy to get passionate about,
Mm,
and we are, and therefore nothing could be better than basically having folks come and visit us. And that's why
mm,
we've invested so much in our physical aspect. We have a really beautiful, it's the best way to describe it is small but perfectly formed. Everything about us is very pocket size, but really nicely done, really beautiful. And I think that seeing production on the scale that we do it makes it much more understandable to people. It's kind of somewhere between a huge distillery and your kitchen. Um,
yeah.
and um, and so, for me, just, getting people to come to the distillery, go on a tour where we explain, everything. And the people who lead our tours are not kind of just, part-timers reading off of scripts. They're the people who work in our shops are passionate enough to have gone out and studied for and received their general certificate in distilling from the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. So
Hmm.
they know what they're talking about and they're passionate about it too, and that comes through. So once you've come on the tour and you've seen how we mill, how we mash, how we ferment, how we distill, how we barrel, how we cask, how we age, and how we bottle, all of which happens right there. you really feel like you've seen the whole thing and you understand it. And then you get to taste, pretty much without limit everything we make. And I think we're on to like 30 different SKUs now. We've gone a little crazy in terms of our
Nice.
creativity. And so just get someone else to drive. And if not, actually, we give drivers drams so you can take some home with you and try it at
Fantastic.
home. But as I said, we really love. This is a business where, because I got into this as a consumer,
Mm,
I didn't understand that if you go into this business like I did, the people you usually talk about being your customers are not consumers. They're stores, they're bars, they're pubs, they're wholesalers, and I've gotten to know those guys, and it's really wonderful and whatever. But the people I'm really in love with are the consumers, because I was one of them, and it was from the love of a consumer that this distillery was born. So
mm,
to be able to have that direct road into the consumer has always been really important to me. And this year, it's kind of also what saved us,
yeah.
because even though we did, for a couple of times we had to close our shops, and we have three shops. We have the distillery shop, and then we have in the visitor center, and we have two shops locally in little really cute little Cotswolds villages. But they were still open for a good part of the summer, and the Cotswolds did benefit from a lot of staycation sort of
Mm,
traffic, and so a lot of people came to see us or came to our shops. But also we've always had this great online platform as well, and people can get all of our sort of core range, but also distillery exclusive stuff that we don't even sell to shops on our
mm.
website. So that's kind of really helped to keep us going with the whole on trade closure and everything, which was hard for us as well as all spirits makers.
Yeah, no, that's good because I think the on trade is always good. Well, even some of the off trade is good to introduce people to a product that maybe they haven't tried before. And that's why I think it's good when staff really understand the brands and the different categories. Because, like you
Mm,
said, it's not always about good and bad, it's what you like or what you don't like. So, just being able to find something you like within that category is good. But then,
yeah.
if you can be introduced to the brand and then go out and do more or get more of it yourself, especially if you have special ranges, and that's fantastic. So it's good that it saw
Mm.
you through. Um, Actually, on that note, so how are you adapting for the holiday period coming up? Is there anything special that you're going to be doing that people might be looking for?
There's a couple of things we got up our sleeves, yeah. And the best way for people to find out if they're interested is just to go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter, and then they get onto our mailing list in our database, and they, in effect, become part of what we call the Cotswolds Club, and we let those guys know about things that aren't sort of for general release. Not
Mm.
even in our shops if they reopen, which we don't know yet. We'll find out pretty soon.
Hopefully soon.
But so we have got two really small, and by small we mean sort of a couple hundred bottles, single cask releases coming out, which we're going to throw out on our website, onto our website as soon as they're bottled, which probably be the end of this month or maybe the first couple of days of December.
Mm.
One is a 6-year-old ex-red wine cask, which is
Mm.
absolutely amazing. It's just the word that when I first tasted it, the word that came to mind was profound. It just had this profound taste. It was just so yummy. It was just incredible, and especially for
Okay.
this time of year, because it was just a lot of chocolate and toffee, but with fruit in it. It was like Christmas pudding in a glass.
Mm.
And then we have a bourbon cask, a first fill bourbon cask that's coming out. So like literally, there's 150 of each of those, and the people in the club will get the first word. They can get onto our website and get those, and once those are gone, that's completely one off. And then the
Mm.
real big news, and you're getting the scoop here,
Oh.
is that so we are very restless in our creativity, or at least I am, and I want to kind of try everything. And we've done, for example, we've done French style Calvados. We call that Cotswolvados, but not while the French can hear us. Um,
Yeah.
and we did some grappa once using local grape skins, local pumice from a
Yeah.
Cotswold winery. And the latest, well, about 2 years ago, we had a little experiment where we did some rum, and we did
Ooh.
we did this rum, and it came out so wonderfully. We did it based on Tate and Lyle #3 treacle, so British, good old British molasses. So it's a real British product, and it's called Cotswolds Treacle Rum. And we are releasing 500 bottles, 500 bottles. I think it's 500 bottles or 480 bottles through our website in December. And I can tell you after trying that is just one of the best things that we've ever done. And really, really, and we're not doing it anymore because we just realized there weren't enough hours in the day to do whiskey and gin and all the other kind of stuff. But this rum will come out and it's great. We also just released our second whiskey Amaro. So sort of bittersweet whiskey digestif liqueur, herbal kind of
Oh.
and so number one came out, Amaro number one came out in May, and that was based on our flagship single malt. And
Mhm.
Amaro number two just came out, and it's based on our peated single malt. We think it might be the world's first peated Amaro.
Yeah, I've
So
definitely never come across it before.
if
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And one of our mixologists yesterday, one of our on-trade sales guys, who's actually a great mixologist, um, came up with a cocktail which I made last night, and it was absolutely unbelievable. And it involved uh, creme de banane and our own cream liqueur, another great seasonal favorite for Christmas, Cotswolds cream liqueur, and some of this Amaro and a little bit of milk and a banana. And he called it the what's it called? Banana Maro. There we go, banana
Banana
Maro.
marrow.
And it was possibly the best thing I've had in weeks to drink. So anyway, there we go.
Oh, well, it's so do you recommend most of them to be sipping, or are a lot of them more for cocktails and mixing?
You're brought up to you learn to say there's no wrong way to drink things in our business, because of course we just want you to we want your custom, and we don't want to tell you how you should or shouldn't be drinking. But I will say that in general, with things that have a lot of time, thought, quality put into them, everything that we make is kind of made to be able to sip just on its own,
Hmm.
and it's got that much love and passion put into it, that and there's nothing that I don't enjoy sipping neat that we make. Even our new make spirit, which we call white pheasant, which is 63 and a half ABV. And the other day I had something, I can't remember what it was pretty heavy for dinner, and I said to my wife, I think I actually need a little bit of new make spirit to just clean the clean the system out. But yeah, no. So our whiskeys are great, neat. Our gins are beautiful, really on their own, or
Mm.
in a martini, which is pretty much most of the way there. Our old Tom makes an unbelievable Martinez, if you like a Martinez. But in the end, yeah, you just drink them as you like it, really, as you
Hmm.
like them.
And is there an option available for people to maybe try multiples rather than buy full bottles or commit to full bottles right away?
Well, we have a couple of little mini gift sets. We have a 3 gin mini gift set, and we have a 3 whiskey mini gift set. But what we've been doing this year, which has been a lot of fun, is we have been doing, as have a lot of spirits companies, online tastings, and we've been
Mm.
making up little tasting kits, which are typically 6 whiskeys and 6 gins. And those have proven really popular. We will do 100 at a time and get 100 people on a Zoom call, and that's how
Yeah.
I typically will spend my Saturday night. I mean, it couldn't be better during lockdown. I get to spend Saturday
That's
night talking
that's
about
actually
whiskey
quite a
with
good
100
Saturday
friends,
night.
100 new friends, and
Exactly.
uh, and by the
12
end of it, we're
drinks.
all pretty happy. I mean, we've all had nice spirits, and yeah, we're going to continue that. And frankly, I think we're going to continue that whether or not we still find ourselves in a pandemic situation, because
Yeah.
it's great fun, and not everybody can get out to the Cotswolds, or maybe in February you don't want to come out to the Cotswolds. I can understand it's kind of cold, and it's people like but you can always just do this and have a fun hour or two learning about things, and talk to the guy who founded the place, and that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a bit of you get to understand about the process and the production, etc., but also figure out what it is you actually like, and then educate
Absolutely.
yourself that way. So that's an excellent initiative. Um, on that note, it would actually be good to get your perspective as a local in the Cotswolds. If you had one day to pop down for the experience, what else would you do other than the distillery?
Yeah, well, we get a lot of visitors from the States and France and different places that we have relatives and friends or whatever, and so you can imagine you get the sort of the the circuit down pretty well. Somebody who
Yeah.
wants to who has a half a day, and you want to show them, what you love about the Cotswolds. Cotswolds is actually huge. It's one of the largest, if not, I think the largest AONB, or area of outstanding natural beauty, in the UK. So it's they're about 100 miles north
Yeah.
from the northern tip to the southern tip, and so you tend to either be sort of a southern Cotswolds person, which is basically south of the A40, which goes from Oxford to Cheltenham, or northern Cotswolds person. So being resolutely North Cotswolds, loving the North Cotswolds, we typically suggest to folks that if they're starting at the distillery, for example, that they head on up to Stow-on-the-Wold, great little town, a little
Yeah.
hilltop, wold top town, have a quick spin around, a little walk around. And then they take the Fossway, which is kind of the main Roman road artery, that's a north-south artery in the Cotswolds, um, down to Bourton-on-the-Water, which is where we have
Mhm.
a shop.
Yeah.
And Bourton-on-the-Water is sometimes referred to as the Venice of the Cotswolds.
It's like
The
that
Windrush River goes right
quintessentially
through,
English. Yeah.
as quintessentially English as you get. From there, there's a great back road um, that goes to Snow's Hill, which is just outside of Broadway, up further north. And
Oh,
that
another
back
one.
road basically takes you sort of on the spine of the high wold. So beautiful vistas left and right. And you end up at Snow's Hill, which is an adorable little village, postcard, chocolate box village. And also has Cotswold lavender, where the lavender from our gin is grown. So if you
Ah,
happen to be there in
nice.
July, it's like you just go over a hill and all of a sudden it looks like you're in the south of France or in Provence or something. It's bizarre and it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then from there, you go down into Broadway, which is a
Hmm.
quintessential
Another
Cotswold
one.
town, where we also have a shop.
Nice.
And then from there over to Chipping Campden, which is another quintessential Cotswold, beautiful town. And then by then you're back around to the distillery, and you've seen some of the high points in the Cotswolds in three.
Mm. Nice. Are there any other Cotswold specific products or, well, especially if you're coming from like the States or Canada or far and away and you want to take something
Mm.
back with you? So obviously you're going to have some gin and whiskey. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Well, I mean, nowadays, in terms of sort of the food and drink scene, it's really flourishing in the Cotswolds. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I mean, certainly stopping at Cotswold Lavender when they're open in the summertime, they've got great products, lots of lavender products that they've made with that local lavender, and that's great. But would you believe it? We have great local cheese here, which, I mean, goes to figure because we've got a lot of, we got a lot of sheep, we've got cows, and um, so there's, I mean, just our neighborhood has its own cheese called Rollright, which is sort of like Roblechon, I guess, with Roblechon met brie kind of, or Camembert kind of, somewhere in between a soft cheese. I don't know if that's allowed back, depending on how far you're going, but it'd certainly be good to bring with you. We've got some great local ciders. Pearson's, it's a Morton and Marsh based cider, awesome
Nice.
apple cider. We've got Cotswold wine from Woodchester Valley. Who knew that you could actually get good wine in the Cotswolds, but it's actually great wine.
Nice.
Um, so it just goes on and on. There's great restaurants here. There's great, pubs and inns and hotels. It's a wonderful, wonderful area.
Yeah, it's very rich in hospitality. I remember I was only there for about 6 months, but it was the best 6 months I had looking after accounts. It was a fantastic area. And I was there luckily sort of from spring through to summer. So I saw probably some of the
That's
best of it.
perfect. Yeah, 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 yeah. When you live in this area, you want to make sure you don't leave it in May and June, because if you're not here in May and June, there's pretty much nowhere better to be on the planet. January we can talk. It's another
Yeah.
another issue.
Those
No, no,
roads,
no.
forget it.
Yeah, no, nobody's drinking, nobody's giving gifts, and nobody's coming to the Cotswolds. So if you're a Cotswolds distillery, it's pretty quiet. But we need a break after a pretty crazy
Yeah,
Q4
fair.
usually. So yeah.
So, on that note, maybe in terms of the business, obviously there's been a lot of changes over the last few months. What is it that you're most looking forward to next year and the next couple of years, if you're allowed to share?
Yeah, well, I love to think that and that's dangerous. I got to knock wood when I say this, that everything bad that could hit us has hit us. So unless we get hit by an asteroid next year or something, I mean, between Brexit, between everything that has come across
Yeah.
sort of, or just we've been aware of from the States that's been happening, from government here, from the pandemic, etc. I really do have high hopes for 21, and I really would love to see hospitality starting to reopen, and things getting a bit back to normal. So we certainly have that to look forward to.
Mm.
With in terms of our products, and in terms of the distillery itself, I mean, making whiskey is the best natural hedge against getting older that you could get, because basically, unlike me, that whiskey gets better every year, and I can always take heart in that and just enjoy that, and basically the reward for having a little bit of free. I mean, you would be surprised. We don't taste our casks as often as you might think. I mean, we've got maybe 3,500 barrels of whiskey now aging away, and we've
Yeah.
probably tried like maybe 200, 300,
Mm.
because there's just sort of not enough hours in the day. Everything is around production and marketing and whatever. And also, our needs are relatively limited. But as those whiskeys get older, and as you start to taste individual casks, you discover things about your whiskey. It changes, it morphs, it follows this really interesting journey. So that's always something to look forward to. Then on the gin side, we are very lucky in that we have really active, and we have for the past 4 years had a full-time R&D activity. Like, we have our own little lab, and we have two people who are working in our lab. So they are just purely R&D distillers, and they're always coming up with weird and wonderful things. And we try, again, without going too crazy, because we already have a lot of products out there. So sometimes we need to retire products to put out other products, but we have new things coming out. So one thing I'm really looking forward to next year is the third edition in our new series of flavored gins, which are called Wildflower Gin,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm.
are inspired by one of the great natural assets of the Cotswolds. I'm sure you saw while you're down here that you
Yep.
go through these fields up on the top of the high wold, and you get these beautiful grasslands, which is what the Cotswolds is famous for. That's why the Cotswolds was big for sheep, because the great grazing ground, and they're just covered with wildflowers. So that kind of inspired us to create this line of gins, which were focused on kind of the taste and aroma and experience, and image of wildflowers. But in terms of taste, we're much more kind of akin to what you might get out of a European style sort of aperitivo. So whether you're talking about sort of
Mm.
Aperol or Suze or Chartreuse, um, these kind of flavors, but married with a proper London dry gin, all in the same liquid. So basically,
Mm-hmm.
50 ml of that with a bottle of your favorite tonic water gives you a
Yeah.
wonderful spritz, basically a gin
Nice.
spritz. So Wildflower number 3, hopefully coming out in April. And we're looking forward to that. We have an annual um, limited edition whiskey called Hearts and Crafts, which is named after the arts and crafts movement,
Uh-huh.
which had its kind of start really in the Cotswolds, or Cotswolds was famous for being the spiritual home of the arts and crafts movement in the mid 19th century,
Mm. Yeah.
and which we liked what that stood for, because it was kind of a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, and it was a belief that you needed to kind of return to sanity, return to the country, return to the traditional way of making things with care and love, which is what we do with our whiskey. So basically, what we do every year is we pick out a couple of really cool casks that are not part of our main line, and we release them. This year it was a Sauterne cask. Next year, who knows? We haven't even decided yet. But I mean, we've cast
You'll get there.
port cask, Madeira casks, rum casks, Calvados casks, vermouth, Tokai wine, you name it. So we've got little parcels of
Fantastic.
this stuff. So every year there's something new and different. So you can sort of see how it never gets dull around the Cotswolds Distillery. There's always stuff that we're coming up with, and there's
Yeah.
always new ideas. It's a lot of fun.
Well, that's how it should be. That's life. It's always experiencing something new. It's always something to look forward to. So I think that sounds great. And on that note, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it's an absolute
It was
pleasure.
great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Hold on. We'll do the cut. Oh, wait.